Sabina, I'm so delighted to have you here because the conversation is going to be so helpful for the brain health aspect, but also the manifestation side of things, which is so equally important. So you have like a remarkable ability to break down very complex neuroscience into this kind of accessible, actionable advice that everyone can use. So I really want to get into it by asking, so everything you are expert in absolutely fascinates me, from the brain health to the female health to the neuroscience of manifesting. But I want to start by asking you about the brain fog element, because a lot of females listening to this and my audience would experience a lot of trouble around brain fog, especially through peri and post-menopause. So why today is that more prominent than ever?
Oh, I think brain fog has been around for a very long time. But I think the fact of the matter is it is something that up until COVID disproportionately affects women. And as most women will know, strides and progress in terms of addressing health issues is very gender biased. And actually a lot of research that's done around health more generally is carried out on males because we have pesky hormones that might interfere with, results or whatever. And I mean, we know for sure in terms of like things like heart medication, medications affect genders differently. So basically, I've experienced brain fog for a number of reasons. You've mentioned some: perimenopause, menopause. Although actually, to be honest, when I was going through perimenopause, there wasn't even a word for perimenopause, to be perfectly honest. I had quite an early menopause, but that's really kind of a new one in my book. I also have some conditions that are predisposed to brain fog. So basically I think it's a nice idea, if you don't mind, to kind of just say what brain fog is and isn't, and then I'll kind of talk about the factors that contribute to it and why it impacts on women. So, I mean, brain fog really is just an umbrella term that describes a collection of symptoms. And they're many and varied. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to write that book was actually because brain fog is such a sort of vague term, but different domains of your cognitive functioning, your mental functioning are affected. And I think it's very helpful to understand which aspects are affected. And again, to be able to go to a GP and instead of saying, look, I have brain fog and I'm concerned why, and say, well, look, here's exactly what's happening to me, and the areas of the brain that are affected or the cognitive functionings range from issues with memory, forgetting things, forgetting to do things, forgetting whether you've done something or not. But then there's also issues with learning. I really wish there was another word for learning. It's got such academic kind of connotations, but we're learning constantly every day. Anytime you open a new door to a new room or go up a new staircase, your brain is learning how to navigate that space. So learning is also affected. So that means, if you're encountering anything new in your life, in your everyday life, that can be affected if you have brain fog. But also you have a slowing of what we call processing speed. So what that means in real terms is that it takes you longer to take in information, figure out what it means, and then formulate a response. And those kind of things can have huge impact on your life. For example, if you've always been a really witty person, quick-witted, first in with a joke, or the first person to come up with ideas or solutions to problems, across the boardroom table, or wherever in the workspace. If your processing speed is slowed, by the time you've come up with that witty remark, the moment has passed. That can be misinterpreted, that you're no longer, you're not really yourself anymore. You were always kind of funny and jovial with me. Why are you not that way anymore? Because most of us tend to interpret other people's behavior in terms of ourselves.
Absolutely.
If you know
we internalize,
Yeah, you kind of internalize it. And if you're slow coming up with ideas in work, it might look like you're disinterested, you're not pushing. It really can have long-term kind of impacts. But a couple of other areas that are affected that are of relevance is a mental fatigue, which is very different to a physical fatigue. If you're physically tired and someone asks you a question about what would you like for dinner or whatever, you can still answer. If you're mentally fatigued, you actually can't. There's this sense that your brain is full and you just, no, sorry, I I can't.
That's an interesting area to think of that's normally neglected in when you think of brain fog.
Yeah, I think it's important because people talk about fatigue and they tend to think of physical tiredness, but actually it's the mental fatigue that can actually be more debilitating. And the interesting thing about mental fatigue is that when you are experiencing mental fatigue, your estimate of time to physical fatigue shortens. So in other words, you think that you have less energy than you have. You think you become tired physically sooner than you do, which is interesting. Another one is that people don't often or are surprised about it. And they don't often associate it with the brain is, I suppose, what people would call it in everyday language, clumsiness. But it's problems with spatial navigation. And, in hindsight, when I, kind of began learning about these things, I kind of go, oh God, that's because I've never been a clumsy person, but I always knew when my period was coming because I'd stub my toe off the end of the bed or, I'd drop something. So that was affected.
It's amazing how that impacts your spatial awareness, that time of your cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why we'll kind of come on to that because hormones play a big role. Let me see what else. There was another one there that popped in. Oh, yeah, language.
Yes.
There's that word finding forgetting the word. But there's also a sense that your language isn't as rich or as fluid or fluent as it ordinarily would be. So, I mean, most of those things, everybody has experienced them at some point. And if you've had jet lag, that's a really good way to kind of get a sense of how it feels to have brain fog. But the difference is when brain fog is persistent, occurs regularly and interferes with your quality of life. That's when, they're really warning signs. In essence, I would say, brain fog isn't a disease or disorder or a diagnosis. Yeah. It is absolutely real and it can be measured in terms of your functioning. What I kind of liken it to is a cough. So if you have a cold and you have a cough with it, you have a direct reason for your cough. But if you've no cold, if that cold gets better, that's gone, but the cough persists. The cough isn't a disease, it isn't a disorder, it isn't a diagnosis, but it is a sign that something is amiss. It's kind of a trigger, or it should be a trigger for you to kind of go to your GP and go, I have this persistent cough. And if you've good GP, they'll try and get to the
root cause.
To the cause, which can be really multiple and varied. It can range from having what you call that gastro GORD, the reflux. It could be an allergy. It could be, postnatal nasal drip causing, it can be like many things, but your doctor will look and see what it is that is amiss. And it's a bit the same with brain fog. Okay. It's a sign that your brain is malfunctioning. Yes. It's not a disease in itself, but let's look at what factors could be contributing to it.
That explanation was so beautiful. That was just so succinct and understanding the umbrella term, because a lot of people would associate it with just memory loss.
Yes, exactly.
But there's so much other things going on, which is just so nice.
Decision making. It becomes impossible to. I mean, there's times when I've had brain fog and I used to travel a lot before COVID, and if I was clear and fresh, I'd go upstairs and I could pack for the trip, a day or two trip. If I had brain fog, it'd take me hours because I'd be there going, okay, so I need something for dinner. And then I need something to wear something different for my talk. I need to see how far the hotel is. Do I have to walk? Is it going to rain? And it was overwhelming trying to figure out what I should put in a suitcase.
And what then exacerbates the symptoms of brain fog when you're in menopause? What worsens it all?
Okay, so probably the best way, there are multiple sort of lifestyle factors, which is where the positive stuff comes in about what you can do. But it's important to first understand that brain fog can be a sign or a symptom of an underlying health condition. And those health conditions disproportionately affect women. So we are talking things like autoimmune diseases, so things like lupus, Sjogren's. I have Sjogren's. And neurological conditions. So we're talking about things like multiple sclerosis, migraine. I have chronic migraine. Multiple sclerosis, a lot of people, if people are familiar with it, it's a neurodegenerative condition that affects very young people, and often people are worried that they may no longer be able to work or actively engage in life because they lose power in their limbs, etc.
And that's important. It's not just when you get older you get brain fog. You can get brain fog
and
at any time.
Any time. Kids get migraine. You know what I mean? But with MS, actually, the factor that is most likely to cause people to be unable to work in the future is brain fog.
Wow.
And thankfully drugs, actually, if you're lucky enough to live in in a country like Ireland and some other European countries, the drugs are wonderful at the moment for multiple sclerosis. But brain fog is still kind of an issue, which is why brain health is really important. So other underlying health conditions, certain cancers,
yes,
depression, anxiety, chronic illnesses, and things like fibromyalgia. So a lot of these, so in multiple sclerosis, people will tend to call it cog fog. In fibromyalgia, they'll call it fibro fog. If it's a consequence of cancer, you move on to the next one, which is often to do with chemotherapy, and you may have heard of chemo brain. And that's the interesting thing, is that unfortunately a lot of the drugs and medications that are used to treat those conditions also can bring about brain fog. Essentially, any medication that acts on the central nervous system has the capacity to interfere with your mental processes.
Contraindication so often is brain fog.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I think what a lot of people aren't aware of is, because people do pop painkillers like, what are they, NSAIDs and, ibuprofen, paracetamol, all those. They all act on your central nervous system.
Yes.
So they can bring about brain fog or contribute to it, because I think that's important. It can be multiple factors, and understanding that can really help if you have an underlying condition. Never stop taking a medication that's been prescribed, but do talk to the prescribing doctor or consultant and say, well, could we try another one that maybe won't affect my cognitive functioning so bad? But over-the-counter medications, like anti-nausea, antihistamine, they all have the capacity to bring about. But if you look at a lot of them, it'll say, may cause drowsiness, and what it maybe is, the kind of the fatigue and don't operate machinery. But that kind of, machinery is dangerous and you shouldn't operate it, but it kind of sort of minimizes the other how cognitive effects can really impact on your life.
You just reminded me, I went through about 6 months of taking antihistamines for urticaria, just a rash on my skin. And they were heavy ones. I was taking probably 3 types a day. And I've never experienced brain fog until then.
Oh, really?
Forgetting everything.
Oh,
Couldn't
my goodness.
String a sentence together some days. I don't know. I didn't understand it at the time. The interaction of what happened. But again, the drowsiness and the lack of sleep also exacerbates.
You see, that's the thing then. And that kind of goes on to the lifestyle factors. But so basically, you've underlying health condition, you have various medications, hormonal fluctuations. So you've touched on that with the perimenopause and menopause. But it can also be premenstrual. It can also be during pregnancy, post-pregnancy. So basically any sort of fluctuation in your hormones can bring about brain fog. And that sounds really weird, because we tend to think of things like estrogen as reproductive hormones. And yes, they are, but you have estrogen receptors in your brain. And you have them in the parts of the brain that are involved in memory and in decision making and in all those. So any change or shift in those has the potential to have an impact on your cognitive functioning. And what we're learning now, thankfully, people are more and more talking about menopause in the open. And what we're learning is that, sort of in the old days, it was like hot flushes are the worst symptom, but actually brain fog is coming about as being the most debilitating symptom.
Especially women in 50s and 60s who were high up in their career and then really difficult to function at the level they were at. Which is so mentally tough.
It is, because also, and it was one of the main drivers for me for writing the book, was for women at that stage of their life who are also most likely to be looking after older parents who may have dementia, and also, managing teens or young adults as well as their career. I mean, that's a lot to take on anyway, you know. But my concern was that there was a lot of women who were experiencing brain fog, who were catastrophizing that they were in early stages of dementia, and not telling anyone, and afraid to tell people, afraid to, you know, and also trying to cover up in work, or thinking maybe I should retire. I don't want, you know, XYZ to happen. So understanding that. But I think when it comes to menopause, because not all women who go through perimenopause and menopause experience cognitive function, I think it's, you know, only about 25% of people don't. So for me, what I think happens there is, when I talk about the other factors that influence brain fog, is that a tipping point is reached. So, for example, I've just mentioned someone who has that kind of lifestyle, you know, a high achieving female, dealing with parents who, you know, who may be aging and need their support, dealing with that high stress job, not sleeping because their progesterone is interrupting their sleep at night. So high stress, sleep, you know, they all are factors that contribute to brain fog. So then I think what may happen is the fluctuations in the hormones then are the tipping point where the brain just kind of can't cope anymore. And so you start to see the cracks. Whereas for some other people, they may well have, you know, good sleep, have a good diet, you know, manage their stress well, so that when the hormones fluctuate, they actually don't really experience it. And in that is really where our solutions lie. So that's kind of where you come to the more lifestyle related factors, or what you can call things that you can have a certain choice about. So I've mentioned sleep. I mean,
cornerstone of hormone balance.
It is just the elixir, you know. I mean, it has evolved and survived because it must serve really important purposes. We're only touching the iceberg in terms of understanding why we need sleep. But sleep is critical just to kind of process information you've taken in during the day, to filter out, you know, unnecessary information.
Emotional regulation, it's so
toxins,
many things.
Everything. And those toxins, you know, the brain is very vulnerable to toxins. And your brain, your body, you know, your brain actually is a really high energy organ. So it produces a lot of metabolic waste. Now, your other organs produce metabolic waste, but your limbic system deals with that waste as it's produced. Your brain hasn't got the capacity to, the waste produced by the brain is not dealt with by the general limbic system. So your brain, brilliant as it is, hasn't got the capacity to be you and clean up after itself at the same time. So basically, I kind of liken it a bit to, you know, if you've ever lived in the States, they have to park their cars, move them from one side of the road to the other as the street clean come on. Or even here, we do a lot of street cleaning at night time. So it's pretty much the same thing. While you're asleep, your brain is doing a deep clean. And those toxins, a lot of the toxins, you know, I mean, for example, beta amyloid is a toxin that is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. That's something that you need sleep to be clearing away every night. You don't want a build up of it. So sleep is absolutely critical. You know, it's on one of my lists. I've never been a good sleeper. I have always struggled with sleep. I've never had the capacity to, you know, I've always struggled to get into a deep sleep. Since I was a child, my mother brought me to a doctor when I was 9 because she said this child never sleeps.
Wow.
I mean, I discovered, I remember, because I had a lot of pain, you know, when I was trying to kind of figure out what was wrong with me in my early 30s. I was given actually an anti-epileptic medication because they were figuring that, you know, my pain receptors were firing too soon and too easily. They were being triggered. I mean, I can cope with a lot of pain, but I sense it sooner than other people. And I think there's a big difference, because when you say you're sensitive to pain, it sounds like, oh, you're a bit of a wimp. It's not that. No. It means that your body senses pain a little bit sooner than it should do.
So it's heightened.
It's heightened. So the thing with the anti-epileptics, again, epilepsy is about heightened firing of neurons. So the anti-epileptic medications help to damp down that. That's why they are often prescribed. And I remember thinking really long and hard before I would go on it. But at this point, like I was literally doing nothing except work because I couldn't walk my dogs anymore. I couldn't even stir, the dinner. That just the pain was, it was just kind of constant everywhere. But I thought long and hard about taking a medication like that. And I remember deciding, okay, I have to do it. And the doctor had said to me, do it at the weekend when you haven't got a lot on, see how it, affects you. So my husband knew I was taking it, and I took it, I think, on the Friday night. And the next morning, he was awake and he said, how was that? And I said, I got into bed, I closed my eyes, and then I woke up this morning. And he said, so you went to sleep? And I said, I've never experienced that in my life before.
Stop.
Yeah. So that was my first sense of.
And was that because the pain?
No, because I didn't even have pain. I didn't have pain as a child, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It was, but I always, when I was asleep, I could still kind of.
You were in a lighter sleep.
I was in a lighter
Yes,
sleep. Oh, I
yeah.
was sleeping, but I was still aware.
And that's interesting because if you look at the like NREM and REM sleep,
Yeah.
you probably weren't ever going into enough sleep at the right times of the
Restorative
night.
sleep.
The restorative sleep to actually clean up.
Exactly. And that's also, I mean, we're still trying to understand it, but it made
Yes.
sense to me that, okay, I'm not getting the restorative sleep, and then your body kind of can't cope and it doesn't
Yeah.
kind of function well. Anyway, that's kind of a little bit of a side tracking. But yeah, if you are getting insufficient sleep, your ability to learn, your ability to remember, your
Yes.
ability to make decisions, your ability to manage your emotions, pretty much everything is affected.
You just touched there on emotional regulation as well.
Yes.
And we talk about, in the peri-post-menopause years and the luteal phase of your period, your ability to regulate is different. But that's a thing that people would feel shame and guilt about.
Yes, and we shouldn't. And I
Yes.
felt shame and guilt. I mean, I always had an argument, like a flaming row coming
Yeah.
up to my period.
Yeah.
I also had terrible headache for 3 days before, and I didn't realise, I just thought everybody has it, again, because people didn't talk about it.
Yes.
I had a headache that I had to go to bed with for days. Now, apparently that was premenstrual migraine.
Yeah.
I only discovered in kind of later life. But again, that's why talking about things is so important.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a time when people didn't even talk about periods. And my mother barely even spoke to me about my period. Do you know what I mean? And you didn't talk to other people. So how do you know what's normal?
I think sometimes as well, when you look at the luteal phase, peri-post-menopause, sometimes you're given a voice because you've had to suppress it for so long.
Right.
You can reframe it in the way that, like, this is my chance to say what I needed to say for a long time, because we're much better at suppressing things when we feel more balanced.
Well, that's about our inhibition, our ability to inhibit, which is a very important social ability.
Yes.
And it is also an ability that is impaired when we drink alcohol.
Yes.
So the truth comes out, or you also do things. You don't inhibit your behavior, and I mean, it's that's one of your executive functions, and it serves very important purpose. But you're right, we can over inhibit too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is kind of very interesting. And I mean, I lost friendships over arguments, and you should, how dare you have said that? You should have X, Y, Z. And you kind of go, now I know, I kind of go, you know what? I really had, God, what do they call it when you have really bad PM? It's more than PMS.
Oh, PMDD.
Yes, PMDD. I mean, I would row with people in supermarket car park. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, I literally, my poor kids, but at least I knew, I would say to them, when mommy just gets angry like this, just go away into your room. It's nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Mommy is just actually not well.
Yeah.
And I would apologize if I shouted at them. I really made it a point. I'm sure it was still awful for them, but
I think that's the most important thing, though, when a parent acts like a human being and isn't completely regulated all the time, that you can apologize to the child and they know that's nothing to do with them. And I think that's important because the generation of my parents, it was always the grown-up is right, always. But if you can adopt the mentality like, I'm human, there's imperfections, it's a much more normal way to do things. And
I felt very out of control at those times. I mean, I literally would sort of see, you hear people say the red descended.
Yeah, the rage.
Yeah, I would see that. And it was like for me that, and it's maybe it's an unfortunate phrase, but maybe it's a good phrase. I just felt there had to be a bloodletting.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't move on.
Yeah.
Till whatever it was.
You couldn't let go, like.
Till it was gone.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I would have my period. You know, it's a very strange thing. But we don't understand ourselves.
No, we don't.
Well
and
enough.
That level of awareness, especially when you said PMDD, like that premenstrual dysphoric disorder, we need to understand there's more of a percentage of people dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. You know, we're looking at society as if everyone's living in this regulated, controlled state.
Yeah.
Whereas for many women, we're controlled by hormonal fluctuations.
Yeah.
And it's so important to recognize that.
I'm glad you said that, because that was the hardest thing I had to write when I was writing Beating Brain Fog.
Yes.
Because, again, I grew up in a time where, is she on their period?
Yeah.
Your mood swings. You
As
know,
if,
and it
like,
was a
you silly
negative,
girl.
you silly girl.
Yeah.
But I had to be honest writing the book.
Yeah.
You know, our hormones hugely influence
Massively.
our behavior. Their change influences who you find attractive from one week to the next. We are animals.
Yeah.
You know, we're animals.
Exactly. There's that primal aspect of it.
We have, yes, and that's nothing negative. Acknowledging that, but then also acknowledging that to a certain extent, we can have that meta-awareness of our, and I think that's really important when it comes to prejudices and things like that. You know, we are inherently prejudiced. We have biases. Excuse me. And that's the only way your brain can operate. It takes shortcuts.
Yeah.
And it has to kind of use heuristics, shortcuts. Oh, they don't look like me. They might be an enemy or whatever. But we have developed, you know, our prefrontal cortex, and we have the capacity to question.
Yes.
What am I basing that on?
Yeah.
Ooh, I think that's just one of my primal instincts.
Yeah.
Okay, now I need to look at actually what the truth is and acknowledge that, you know, sometimes we do behave like that. And I think also, and I think that's something we were talking before we started recording about political correctness.
Yeah.
And this is where I think there's a certain problem with the cancel culture is, gosh, we learn from mistakes. We don't learn from being cancelled. Do you know?
I totally agree with that.
And, you know, it is part of being human.
And you have to realize in the span of your life, the chapters you go through with your personality, your moods, like there's different states all the time. You do something when you're in a lower state, possibly that isn't characteristic of you.
Yep.
And there has to be this, especially for women, this massive level of self-compassion to be able to navigate through that without just being laden with guilt all the time.
Yeah.
And fully have the self-awareness to say, okay, that highly triggered me today and I really felt rage. Why was that? What happened in the past did that remind me of? Why did that trigger happen? And once you have the self-awareness and you say, okay, this is a global phenomenon. Yeah. I'm not on my own, that I just have huge rage issues. And I felt that for the first time, like massive rage postpartum.
Okay.
Because of the fluctuations of hormones. And I didn't understand at the time, why is this annoying me 10x times than it would normally?
Right.
And again, you just have to understand the female body and the fluctuations.
Yeah.
And understanding, progesterone's pretty low now because I'm sleep deprived.
Yeah.
I'm very stressed with kids crying all the time. You know, X, Y, and Z. Same with estrogen.
Yeah.
And like you said, estrogen is that hormone that we all associate it with maybe bone health and fat distribution, but also brain health.
Yeah.
It impacts mood.
It really does. Mood and decision making and, you know, so many kind of aspects. God, I wish I had someone like you when I was younger, because the guilt of those arguments, the arguing with yourself about why are you such a horrible person? How come no one else does this? Well, maybe no one else actually has PMDD. Do you know what I mean?
And actually, the percentage of people now that has PMDD is quite high.
Right.
Yeah. And when the reason I have looked at this so in depth, because I always labelled myself as a person who had a temper.
Yes.
And I never actually realised that. First of all, I exacerbated that by labelling myself as having a temper, but also I didn't see the pattern that it was at certain periods I had the temper.
Yeah, because people used to say to me, I remember someone saying to me at one point, do you have a lot of conflict in your life? Sort of, and I felt that was so accusatory.
Yeah.
But
are you grappling with demons, you know?
Yeah.
No.
And I think what it was I have a natural I suppose I have a natural drive, and I think it's important to understand, your own inherent drivers and your values and things that matter. So I had a really strong sense of justice.
Yes.
And
such a good thing to recognize. Like that's a quality that I really,
but also, you don't have to fight for every fairness and justice, which I did. It took me a long time to realize.
I can let go.
Actually, it mightn't be the best idea, because I've got into trouble a few times, and I've spoken about this before. I mean, I having just said to you that I've shouted at my children, I've, said terrible things when I was whatever. But if I saw someone on the street hitting a baby, I have to say it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But it's funny you say that. That sounds like the complete obvious thing to do. But a lot of people will walk past that.
Oh, absolutely. It happened to me one time. My husband actually had to take me out. The woman was going to attack me. We went into some sort of fast food takeaway, one of the chain ones. And it was in just like a supermarket shopping centre rather than in town. And there was loads of people sitting around. And this woman had 4 kids with her. And she was just being really nasty to one of the kids. Mm-hmm. And anytime he opened his mouth and shut up you, like it was really just whatever. I can't remember the ins and outs of it. She was in the queue. We were kind of coming towards the queue. And she did something really nasty to the child. And I just couldn't. And I just said to the boy, and I said, I just felt, and I can't remember exactly, but I know I said something to the fact of, your mummy shouldn't, No, I said something like, your mummy being angry with you has nothing to do with you. You're a lovely boy or whatever. And I said, your mummy really shouldn't be hitting you like that. And she turned around to me. She says, he's my effing child. Yeah. I can effing do what I want with him. And I said, no, you can't. He's your child, but you have to care for him. You can't. She started to climb over the counter. She was actually coming after me. And I felt so bad then because, what was awful actually, what really bothered me was everyone else in the restaurant just put their head down and ate their chips. Yeah. My husband grabbed me and I said, no, she shouldn't do that. But, that's not fair to the child. And he says, come on, let's go. Let's go. Get in the car. And he said, Sabina, look, I know where you're coming from, but she was actually going to throttle you, like she really was.
Yeah. But it's interesting as well to look at the concept of when a mother is in a very dysregulated state with bad mental health, what happens. But also there's a responsibility of some people, maybe in community or around, to call that out and to see if there's solutions. And
there's an interesting thing I wrote about, I did it about in my podcast, but there's a little area in the frontal lobe that some people like me who speak out, it's more active. Or no, it's less active, so we don't inhibit.
Oh, right.
And that really helped me make sense. And I can't remember the name of it, so you'll have to forgive me. You might find it on my podcast. But that helped me make sense of, okay, some of us have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know? But everyone, we also have to
look at the tribe, though. Some people stay quiet. Some people are the voices. It's like everyone has a
if you
role.
Don't do that, you don't make progress. Doesn't happen. And it's the same. I hate to see people labeling emotions as bad emotions and good emotions. Anger is an emotion. It has evolved because it serves some sort of purpose. Mm-hmm. Where it becomes problematic is when it's directed at the wrong person or the wrong thing, or you actually suppress it and then it explodes in another way. Mm-hmm. Actually, anger is something that brings around change.
Yes.
Do you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's harnessing that and understanding that every emotion has a place.
Yes.
And that's important, I think, to fully understand, because if you look at that emotions wheel, that's just very basic emotions wheel, most people can't label any of them emotions they're feeling. They can say happy, sad, angry.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. But it's understanding like the next layer.
But also how we interpret.
Yeah.
So your brain gets, messages from the external environment, but it gets messages from the internal environment. And often our upbringing, our previous experiences influence how we interpret those internal ones.
Totally.
So I could interpret something, those kind of butterflies in your tummy, like that release of adrenaline as excitement.
Yeah.
Someone else can just see it as, oh no, I'm anxious. Oh my God, I fear something awful is going to happen. Yes, absolutely. And a lot of that is, I think there's always, we have temperaments and traits, but then we have environmental upbringing and
nature, nurture, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just not simple like that. You kind of have to take it on board
from like a primitive response. If you look, if you look at a day in the life, right, and me and you do the same day, you can have on, maybe you're in freeze or you're in fight or flight mode, right?
Yeah.
So the tinted glasses you're wearing maybe have like a darker tint to them.
Yep.
Whereas I'm in rest and digest mode, mine look clear, everything looks good. I'm interpreting noises differently.
Yeah.
I'm interpreting
Everything.
facial expressions differently.
Yeah.
So if you're in that response and you're in, maybe you're anxious, depressed, or you're going through mentally difficult period, you're interpreting everything differently.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where, and again, that's another thing in the neuroscience of manifesting. Like, I have a good section in the book about reality.
Yeah.
Do you know? Our reality, so, manifesting ultimately is about changing your reality.
Yes.
And some people think that's rubbish. How can you change your reality? Of course you can change your reality. You influence your reality on a day-to-day basis by how you perceive the reality that you are experiencing.
Even just pausing on that and really letting that sink in, like how you perceive things completely changes the reality of how you look at everything around you. And I get this, sometimes I look at my house my granny lived in, and I see that with two different lenses. I see it with a very sad, dark lens of when she died.
Yeah.
And I see it with a happy lens of when we're younger. I'm completely interpreting the exact same environment differently, just the way I perceive it at different points.
Yeah.
And that's crazy to think of that, even your workplace, your home.
But everything, and it's like our sense of self is just a story that our brain has told us so that we can interact in the world. And I think a lot of people think, like you said, I had a temper, always thought I had a temper. Our sense of self is created basically by lots of bits of information that your brain has pulled together to give us a cohesive sense of something. Now, some of that data that your brain has used is completely obsolete.
Yeah.
I mean, how many things from our childhood still influence who we are and still make us feel, oh, that's who I am, or that's just a part of who I am. Some of the information isn't even true, or maybe was true and is no longer true. A lot of the information that constitutes our sense of self is just someone else's opinion. Yes. Some random person, when you were 5 years old, said something mad like, you'll never be good at sport, or you'll never amount to anything, or you're lazy. And we take it on. And you see, the brain doesn't make any sort of value judgments on this. It just kind of collects information together and kind of, okay, well, that'll work. We've got to interrogate that.
I think of it like a storybook. And
absolutely.
You're the author and you go back to the first draft and you're thinking, oh, I need to edit some of this. Like, this
absolutely
is false. And again, the day the person that criticized you when you were 4 years old said that thing, again, that was a projection of That's
just their opinion.
Their opinion, exactly.
It was literally just a random person's opinion that at a point in time when you're developing and your brain is taking in information, goes, oh, okay, that's an independent opinion. Let's put that in. Which is why, again, parenting is so important.
Yes.
Or, teachers who are in a position to give positive reinforcement to kids who maybe aren't getting it at home, rather than where it can be, again, teachers can be, they're human and they can, say things to kids.
Yes.
That they don't realise can have a lifelong effect.
Absolutely. And I think as a profession and as a former teacher, you're overworked to a large extent and undervalued, etc.
Yeah.
And of course, you're in this kind of dysregulated state where you're not functioning in the flow state very often, or feeling you're able to actually teach effectively because of the environment. So it's interesting that a person who has massive impact on a child, huge, isn't given the optimal circumstance a lot of the time. So like teachers, God love them, and I have so many clients that are teachers, have to really go above and beyond to find regulation tools and to really delve into that to be able to show up then in a more regulated way.
We have just such crazy systems that we have set up. I mean, the same applies to doctors. Young doctors, work stupid hours. They're sleep deprived. When you're sleep deprived, you cannot assess risk.
No.
You cannot make decisions. And yet you have young doctors left doing night shifts where there's no senior consultants on board, and they're dealing literally with life or death situations. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's the same with teachers. I do also think that it is problematic to just have a single teacher. Because teachers are human, kids are human. Part of the human condition is personality clashes, is just not getting on with people. So I think rather than, try and I think we need much more supports for teachers. I think we need smaller classes, but I also think we need multiple interactions for the teaching to avoid those kind of secondary education works much better, because
you're rotating the teacher all day.
If you're hated by a particular teacher, or a particular teacher dislikes you, yes, I know professionally they shouldn't, but they are human, and some of those things will just come through.
I think a child, and I never really understood this when I was young, that again, like adults have biases. If a child can understand that and not internalize it, it's very, very difficult. But if the parent can constructively say to them, look, this is human nature. It's very little to do with you. It's everything to do with their past and how you're showing up and reflecting certain things.
So you've just hit on something, which is why I do what I do. I am just passionate, I suppose, ultimately about explaining to people how their brains work so that they can better understand themselves and have an opportunity to reach their true potential, whatever that is. I think it is absolutely crazy that most people have no idea how their brains work. I think we should be teaching our children how their brains work. It is far more important. Like, do you know what? Introduce a child to poetry. It's wonderful. But you don't have to learn about 40 poets to understand that poetry can be a wonderful part of your life. However, if you could just understand how your brain works, that not only could, help you navigate the world, it might actually turn you into a brilliant poet or someone who wants to, who realizes, because I think a lot of people don't, they've lost the connection with their true passion. And we do all have it. We have things that we find intrinsically motivating, things that are inherently pleasing to us, things that we're naturally good at. And I think, unfortunately, our education system is so narrow and overemphasizes academic ability that many kids get lost along the way and they don't end up fulfilling their true potential. And I think actually education should be about understanding ourselves from a very, very early age. I just think that's critical. And I remember saying that one night at a dinner party, something to that effect, around actually understanding yourself, but also understanding how life works.
And imagine the merit in a child understanding, like, oh, the limbic part of my brain, this is what happens when this behavior happens. Or like, oh, this is what the hypothalamus, just understanding.
This is why I need to go to sleep tonight and not have my phone in my bedroom.
And I think that's such an interesting concept. If you fully understand the deep rationale behind something, of course you're going to be more likely to do the behavior, even if you're a teenager.
Well, and I mean that's really interesting about the teenage brain. But it's not about telling. Like a lot of my husband always says, when he asked why when he was a kid, why do I have to go to? That's the why. Now go. You know what I mean? That's the why. And possibly they didn't even understand themselves why they were trying to get kids to go to bed.
Imagine like simply and succinctly being able to say to a child, well, at night time, your brain does a lot of cleaning up. And tomorrow you'll be much happier if you allow that, just
and you'll be smarter and you'll be able.
Yeah, I enjoy school more.
I developed a thing called Brain Health for Kids, which was a sort of an activity school program, which I was allowed to trial in a Desh school in St. James's. And we trialed it with kind of 9-year-olds. And it seamlessly integrated with all the various subjects, things that we're doing. And this was a school where there was some really deprived kids and a lot of violence in their families, kids 9 who had older brothers going to school with stab vests on, like that kind of stuff. And they had a lot of conflict in the yard. And they just said that it just really, really changed things dramatically, and they were able, because being sociable, engaging with other people. Like one of the things was, look around the yard today, if somebody's on their own, why not go over and say hello and ask them what games they'd like to play?
Yeah.
Just suggestions that actually, because there's so many social norms and people go, oh, well, I don't talk to other people. I have to stay with this in this group. But
even that rationale behind my brain health, a huge factor of that is me socializing with other people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's critical.
Massive.
It's critical.
And that's why I think like the deterioration of mental health and probably brain health is probably at an all-time high, because we're not interacting with humans as much as we used to.
It is something that concerns me, with, I suppose, the explosion of the internet. It's the unintended consequences, and I think it can be as catastrophic in a different way as the atom bomb.
Yeah.
Basically, people have just done stuff with social media, with AI, etc., just because they can. But anything that interacts with your brain has the potential to change how that brain functions and to change how our brains evolve.
Yes.
So I have, like, social interaction we know is absolutely critical. And we also know that social isolation and loneliness actually change how your brain functions and how you interact socially. And in fact, if you become socially isolated, your brain won't allow you go into deep sleep. Because from an evolutionary perspective, you have to understand that we have evolved over millions of years, and we're still using brains that evolved for that a very different kind of environment. We had more social groups. We were getting our exercise from actually going hunting and gathering together, our food and together. And if a mother couldn't cope with a baby, there was somebody else there where the toddler could wander over to, or, I think one of the biggest mistakes, I think, and, that we lost our way as a species or as a group of people. We took a wrong turning when we decided that success should be measured by how big a box we can isolate ourselves in.
Yes.
Now, I live in a lovely box and I love it, and I love being isolated.
Oh my gosh.
But the point I'm making is, we have completely distanced ourselves from community. I mean, the loneliest I ever felt in my life, was after I had my first baby. It was way before social media.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah, way before any of those times. And I really, really struggled.
What an abnormal scenario, though, if you compare it to the village. And I felt this so much last year. We were in Dubai for 5 months, and it was the first time I was really just with me and my 2 daughters, who were 3 at the time. And it was such an intense and, to be very honest, unenjoyable experience, because it's not natural for you to be on your own with your children all the time. It's not. You need the adult interaction. You need them to have more interaction with other humans too. Yeah. And I felt so inadequate and not enough. Yeah. But in hindsight, it was so clear it was because we're made to be with multiple other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, if you go back to hunter gatherings, do you think that strong, fit, young females aged 21, 22 were left sitting at home minding the babies? Actually, no. They were out hunting and gathering, but other generations were there, slotted in.
The role of the granny,
Yeah. And even not even just the granny. I remember talking to someone very early on when I started giving talks, and he was saying, an Irishman, but he did a lot of work way over in Brazil, somewhere hundreds of thousands of miles or thousands of miles away from kind of big cities or whatever. And he said they had such a communal way of living. He said the kids would play football barefoot, but the boys, 12-year-old boys, would come down for a game of football with their 2-year-old sister on their hip. Yeah. Do you know? And the 2-year-old sister would be plonked at the edge and, someone would be playing, and whoever wasn't playing, that one would sit with the tots. It was just integral. Everybody, that the whole thing. It takes a village to raise a child.
It really does, though, and I think
it really does.
Subtract the guilt from mothers feel, because they're saying, "Oh, I'm not enough." Well, you're not meant to be enough.
No, you couldn't possibly. be enough. And also, I felt scared. I felt very scared because my first child. And I hate saying it because it feels like I'm pointing a finger. It's just the nature of what it was. He cried all the time, and he didn't go. He didn't go to sleep, and he would breath hold if you did what you were told to do. Put him in a cot, walk away. He'd go purple in the face. He'd make himself sick, and there is only like a baby's cry is incredibly distressing for humans to hear.
Hugely.
And it has evolved that way. So you immediately go to do anything to make it stop.
Yeah.
If
It's
that
so
cry
powerful.
goes on and on and on, I got to the point now, I was fortunate enough, that I did have someone that I could call on, like my husband. But I remember days putting him in the middle of the bed, folding my arms and saying, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. And it was before mobile phones.
Yeah.
But I had to put him there for his own safety.
Yes.
And I'm not saying I condone when mothers do horrific things like shake a child.
But it's important to remember the mental health and what happens postpartum if you're left in isolation.
Yes.
And that's extremely important, what you just said. That I remember that sound, one of the twins had colic, and I'm very, very lucky both of my parents were help. My dad stayed up through the night for 6 months.
Wow.
I think he was pretty sure that I would have either had a psychotic episode, sleep because of sleep deprivation, or something would have happened mental health wise.
Yes.
And he stayed up for the 6 months. And
Wow.
I've never been as grateful to a human ever, because your thoughts are obviously the darkest at night.
Yes.
But the other day we were at a pet farm and there was a woman and she had 2 children, and in the pram the child was no more than 1 or 2 weeks old. And the sound of that child crying, I actually had to leave. I got this response which my body felt and my brain, it just brought me back into like 4 years ago, and it was so deeply dysregulating. I can't even explain it. But she was dealing with other kids. She couldn't get there. And I was like, this is such a primitive thing that's deeply within us. I wanted to go over to the child, pick it up and hold it.
Yeah, but if you think of that, if we're living in a community, that is exactly what
I
would
have
happen.
done that. Yeah.
You just go over and pick up and nurse the child. And that woman that I mentioned earlier was clearly struggling with what she was doing. And unfortunately, that can sort of be directed on one child.
Yeah.
So on the one level, she needed help. But on the other level, again, a bit like you, I'm kind of going, no, that poor child. Like I can't. But I went home that night and then I really, if I talk about the guilt, I felt so bad. I said to David, I think I've probably made it worse for the child, because she's going to blame that child. That is really quite possible, and something I have to acknowledge that in those moments sometimes you actually aren't lucid enough to consider the consequences of them. But for me, then I just said to myself, well, I hope at some point that little boy remembers.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I said, but I know it was kind of something that I wanted him to hold on to, that kind of way.
Yeah. Because I think it's very easy when you're in a bubble as well of your family that all the behaviours in the family are obviously normalised. But sometimes it takes an external person to point out, oh, you're functioning in this dysfunctional way. Did you realise?
Yeah.
No,
you don't, because what's normal for you is normal for you.
Your bubble is normalised.
Yeah.
It's very important to be aware of that.
And actually, that's something that I kind of tried to touch on as well in the book, The Neuroscience of Manifesting, is because it was one of my peeves about manifesting is, if you don't manifest what you want, you're somehow doing it wrong, or you don't deserve it, because this thing of the law of attraction, you get back what you put out, and that really bothered me, and I kind of wanted to go into that. And the fact of the matter is, we're not all starting at the same point.
No.
We have completely different paths. Your genetics even influence how likely you are to have one-night stands.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So nobody is, and I used an example in the book of, a couple who've decided they want to adopt, more healthy lifestyle. They're going to exercise, they're going to eat healthy, and they're going to prioritize their sleep, right? In a couple, let's do it together. It'll be much easier to do it together. And he is flying along up to the gym, really coping, sleeping well. She's struggling. She feels too fatigued in the morning to go to the gym. She's done 1 or 2 days. She's really feeling awful looking at him. However, she's feeling cravings for sugar and for fatty foods, and she's beaten down on herself. How come he can do it and I can't do it? Well, actually, if you look at this individual, she actually has insomnia. She has a family history of insomnia. She's a female, therefore she is more likely to experience insomnia. If she is not getting good sleep, she is just
craving sugar.
She's going to crave sugar. She's going to
Injured.
create fat. She's going to be too tired to exercise.
Yeah.
She's going to be demotivated. She's not on top form. She cannot compare herself. The only person you can compare yourself is yourself 5 minutes ago,
Yes.
last week, 5 years ago. That is how you measure progress. And in that case, her goals, and that's why it's so important if you're deciding on goals that you want to manifest, is to get to know yourself and to decide on something that is important for you, that aligns with your values, that matters to you. So in that example, she should just focus on trying to find a way, get some therapy, there's CBT for insomnia, to deal with the sleeping issue.
And that's so good you touched on that, because people are trying to manifest what you think everyone else wants, like your expensive house, car, etc.
Yeah, money. Yeah.
Yes. And I did, reading The Secret as everyone did. It was back in 2016 and I made my vision board and I was very clear I want X, Y and Z. And I did manifest and achieve all them things, which actually now it seemed crazy that they all came true. Like I had twins on that vision board.
Yeah.
Just the partner the twins had was exactly like what I described, everything. But a lot of the things on the vision board were not in line with my values.
Right.
So when I did manifest them, it felt off and wrong immediately.
Right. So that's something I really tackled in the book, right?
Yes.
So if you look, you've probably read several books. An awful lot of them they begin with gain clarity about what you want. Now, that's way down the line.
Yes, because first you do all the inner work of
First of all,
yourself.
you have to do the inner work.
Yes.
Because how can you be clear about what you want if you're not clear about who you
Exactly.
are? And the thing is, if you have limiting beliefs, you're not going to attain or achieve. So to be honest, what I've done in the book, I call them all, I think 6 or 7 C's. So the very first chapter actually is called Compassion. And that's about developing self-compassion and about acknowledging that self-criticism is a form of self-harm.
Yeah.
Who else would you, just take the dialogue that goes around in your, is it a monologue? Sometimes it's a dialogue for me. But that voice in your head that criticizes you and said, oh, you're useless, or you can't do this, can't do that.
Total abuse.
Imagine saying that to someone else.
I always think, like yourself, you think of your 2 sons, I think of my 2 daughters. That's exactly, imagine saying it to them. It's total abuse.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Or imagine that your best friend is in a relationship and that new partner is saying all these abusive things. You say, come here. Get out of that relationship. It's unhealthy. But that's the relationship we have in ourselves. So the very first thing we have to do is start to be kind to ourselves. And what I find really interesting is that whatever specific thing people want to manifest, if you ask why enough, you come down to the answer of, well, I want to be happy. Yeah. Right? The side effects of self-compassion, the benefits of self-compassion is that people who are more self-compassionate are happier and they're more content. Yeah. So you've won before you've even figured out a goal if you work on that. The second chapter I call Connection, and it is about explaining to you how your brain creates your reality and creates your sense of self and why it is really important to start interrogating the story of you and rewriting a new one. And as part of that journey, I think it's really important to get to the crux of, what your real values are, what matters to you, and also what your passions are. Like it really is, you're essentially what you're doing is getting away other people's opinions, other people's influence on your life, and there at the core, you will find your kind of
your purpose, your passion,
your purpose,
everything.
your passion. But you'll also find your traits. You've got to be honest. You'll also find, well, actually, do you know what? I have a tendency towards anxiety, or I have a tendency towards this. That's part of it, you know. But it's to get rid of those limiting beliefs and those negative perceptions, because that's the thing. Optimists are happier than pessimists, but it's not that, the same thing can happen to both of them, but the optimist will choose to see the good thing. The pessimist will see the bad thing. And actually, to the extent that they are completely blind to the good things, completely blind. The next chapter I have in the book is called Change. Because manifesting is ultimately about changing yourself, about changing your future, about changing your reality. And change is rather interesting because change is essential for your brain, but also your brain doesn't like change. So you have this constant tug of war because your brain essentially is a prediction machine. Yeah. And that's how our past influences us, because you've learned in the past, oh, if I say that, they'll only say something nasty or whatever.
We want the familiar hell.
You're predicting. Your brain is just predicting based on
past experience.
Yeah, or the selective past experience or whatever. Now, in order to make better predictions, your brain has to have more experience. The more knowledge, the more experience, the more novel experience a brain has, the better its predictions will be, because it's got more information to predict from. Okay? So that's why that's really important, and that's why change should be an ongoing part of our life, not just like manifesting isn't, oh, I'm going to manifest this and then I'm done. It should be ongoing.
Yeah. And of course, to manifest, you have to continuously push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. And that's where the knowledge and the learning comes from. And that feeds into brain health because of neuroplasticity. But on the other hand, your brain dislikes change because your brain's primary function is to keep you alive. Mm-hmm. And so maintaining the status quo is the easiest way for your brain to keep you alive, because it can predict, if I just do this, if I never go outside,
I know the outcome.
I know the outcome of what will happen. But then your brain isn't harnessing neuroplasticity, because in order to harness neuroplasticity, it requires novelty, learning and change.
I think as well, it's like the snowball effect of the more you get outside of your comfort zone, it's like the more you're going to find that easier to do.
Absolutely.
You're learning it.
It's the fundamental criteria for resilience.
Yes.
So basically, embracing change, doing new things, helps you adapt.
It does.
Absolutely. Your brain is learning how to cope, how to deal with that. Yeah. And so the next time that comes, well, actually, that's going to start to become easy. And that's why you have to have this that's where the joy of life comes from, is this ongoing journey of achieving, because we get this fabulous buzz when we do achieve.
Yeah. And what's so funny is most people, because the routine of our life, like the Industrial Revolution 9-to-5 job, we're not really getting that many novel experiences unless we really seek them.
Yes, that's very true.
Whereas in the past, a novel experience would be every day, because you'd be out in the open, there'd be new people, you'd be quite organic and normal. But right now, it's the same people each day, unless you seek a new hobby. Yeah. Or you seek...
Which is why I'm a huge fan in terms of brain health of lifelong learning. And I don't mean academic learning. It's just doing new things. Since I moved down the country, I operate chainsaws, I ride zero-turn mowers, I'm learning about,
It's not just about Sudoku.
Oh, no, absolutely. And you know what? Do Sudoku if you like doing it, but it's actually really not going to benefit your brain unless it involves challenge and learning. Yeah. So it's the same with crosswords. If I had a penny for the amount of people when I go give talks about brain health come up and be, I do crosswords and Sudoku. Bully for you. Yeah, and puzzles. Bully for you. But if they're easy for you, that means you're not getting neuroplasticity. Yes. And that's at the core of brain health.
Like what would really push me now is if you gave me an IKEA box and I would actually have to panic, because I wouldn't know how to do it. But imagine I got through that. That would that's like the biggest thing for me when I think of having to do DIY or that kind of thing. I'm like, wow, that would really push me to think outside of what I'd normally do.
Outside of the box.
I was just about to say it really would.
But it would. But then you gain confidence.
Absolutely.
Or you get to a point where you go, actually, I can't figure this bit out. I might ask for some help. Yeah. Because learning also involves understanding that sometimes we need input from others. It doesn't mean that you have to go it alone. Sometimes it involves watching someone else put it together. Yes. So say you have a partner or you have a dad or you have someone who's good at doing the IKEA box, instead of just giving it to them and walking away, sit and watch them go, oh, that's how that works. Yes. Or you work as a team. When we moved, one of the things we figured we would miss would be the gym. Mm-hmm. So I said, right, we're going to spend money on one of those home gyms, right? So I found one online that was relatively reasonably priced. And of course, it arrived in like multiple boxes with about 6 million pieces. And I went, oh my God, like it was really scary.
That would be terrifying to me now, genuinely.
It was scary from one perspective. For me, actually, it tapped into something that I love, which is I love order and organizing and following
the plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I read the instruction booklet and it said, first of all, lay out and make sure you have everything. And that was like, woo, that's my happy place. There's 4 of those. Oh, that's one of those. Oh, that one goes there, right? My husband is the complete reverse. Okay. He's dyslexic. He hates he finds it hard to follow those kind of things. And I'll just figure it out. Okay.
Yeah.
But he's much stronger than I am. So we were just a perfect team. I literally laid out all the things. He stood there and I said, okay, first you need this one, and you've got to screw them together. Now you need this one, and you've got to. And we built it in a few hours, and it was just brilliant. But I couldn't have done it on my own, and he couldn't have done it on my own. But we got this joint kind of, and instead of arguing with each other, we just accepted, well, you're good at that bit. Yeah. And I'm good at this.
And it's funny you say that, because the only reason I'd be scared to try something new is if I thought, I have to do it in isolation, I can't ask for help.
But you see, you don't have to.
No, exactly. But in my mind, I did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, and again, that's kind of the social aspect. And again, that's how we evolved into being these real complex creatures. I mean, I know this is kind of digressing, but I find it really fascinating that, we're close to apes. You know, and at some point we were very similar. We still are quite similar, but something happened, and the theory that I like most about what happened is that we discovered how to harness fire. When we discovered how to harness fire, we discovered how to pre-digest food, and our counterparts, the big gorilla, has to chomp on food for 10, 12 hours a day to get the nutrients he needs just to stay alive. Yeah. By pre-digesting food, we no longer had to do that. Now, we did have to sacrifice brawn, but in return, we got brain, because the time that pre-digesting our food freed up allowed us to be innovative, to be social, to develop language, to develop tools, to figure out ways. I just think that's kind of fascinating. And it's something that I think when people talk about new technology changing us, well, that's an example. Harnessing fire is a new technology that dramatically changed. I mean, you see the evolution of the human brain from that period. It is incredible. Our neocortex developed, our frontal lobes developed. So that's why the new technologies will always impact on us. Think of writing, printing, all those kind of things. And I think it's, what's his name, the famous philosopher, he was terrified about writing down stuff because he said, the human brain, will suffer because if people don't, it'll be obsolete because people don't have to memorize anymore. But it freed us up to do something else.
More freeing up.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance between when we get where we are now in terms of technology is that, yes, and I'm not against technology. I mean, I couldn't survive without it. Couldn't write my books without it, But we need to find what that balance is so that it doesn't change us for the worse, that it allows us to take our brains to a higher level or a different level.
Yeah, I found that whole conversation so fascinating, and I really want to ask you back for a second episode to really delve into the neuroscience of manifestation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because we've only touched on it, literally tip of the iceberg, but so much great things on brain health there, and actually even understanding the brain a little bit more. Even if you got a nugget of that, that's going to change your life. So thank you so much. Where does everyone find you? Because it's kind of hard to find you, bar the books.
Oh, is it? Oh God, I'm terrible. I really should do social media more. Yeah, I'm at Sabina Brennan, I think, on Instagram. If not, there might be an underscore in between the two.
Yeah.
But I know.
Website?
It's kind of an old website, but there's a Superbrain website, the Superbrain
there
podcast.
We go, Superbrain podcast.
Yeah, I there's 5 seasons up there, and I'm going to be starting a 6th season this year. I took a hiatus when I kind of moved house, and I also wrote 2 books.
And of course, the books.
Yes, the books are
3
there.
of them now.
3 books, and I also have brain gym in a box.
Oh, great!
Which is a card a day where you pull out a card and they're beautifully illustrated. I didn't do the illustrations.
You can find them online.
You can buy them online, or you can buy them in bookstores. And I have a new book coming out next July.
And will that follow on from the Neuroscience of Manifestation?
No, it's actually kind of going back to a book that I've wanted to write. It's a kind of a passion project, actually. Nice. I started writing it after I wrote my first book, and it was really shortly after my own mum died dementia. So this book is for people who care for someone with dementia.
Oh, what a powerful thing to
I'm
give to
really,
people.
I'm really, really excited because it really does. The first third of the book focuses on the caregiver and your mental health. And a lot of the things, a lot of caregivers are females.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that you were talking about, the guilt that you feel, and I should do this and I should do that. And it really is, that part of the book is about caring for yourself and trying to relieve some of that guilt and also give tools. And then the second part of the book is something I'm passionate about, which is human rights approach to dementia care. That person is still there. If they were your mother, they're still your mother, you know. And then the third part of the book is very practical brain health information and tools that people can use to prolong certain functionings in dementia. So I'm excited about it. It really is one of those kind of passion
I'm really looking
projects.
forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm so looking forward to the next episode.
Me too.